Michael Jackson was in the middle of Thriller when his microphone suddenly went dead. 72,000 fans at Wembley Stadium fell into confused silence as the king of pop stood frozen on stage, his lips moving but no sound coming out. The band kept playing, the dancers kept moving, but Michael's voice had vanished. Then, from somewhere in the darkness of the arena, a single voice rose up. Clear. Perfect. Impossible. A 12-year-old girl was singing Michael Jackson's part, note for note, as if she had been born to do it. Michael stopped moving completely and stared into the crowd. Because that voice shouldn't exist. It was July 22nd, 1988 at Wembley Stadium in London. Michael Jackson was performing the third night of his Bad World Tour's London residency, and the energy was absolutely explosive. He had already electrified the crowd with Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, and Billie Jean. Now he was deep into Thriller, the song that had defined an entire generation and made Michael Jackson a global phenomenon. The iconic music video, the revolutionary choreography, the unforgettable bass line. Everything about Thriller was perfection. But on this particular night, something was about to go catastrophically wrong. And then miraculously right in a way that nobody could have predicted. In the audience, in section 201, row 18, seat 34, sat 12-year-old Sophie Chen, a Chinese-British girl from Manchester who had been obsessed with Michael Jackson since she was 5 years old. Sophie wasn't like other fans. She didn't just love Michael Jackson's music. She lived inside it. Sophie had a condition called chromesthesia, a rare form of synesthesia where she could see music as colors and shapes. When most people heard a song, they just heard notes. When Sophie heard music, she saw entire universes of color exploding in her mind. For Sophie, Michael Jackson's voice wasn't just sound. It was liquid gold pouring through dimensions of purple and silver. Every note he sang created geometric patterns that only she could see. She had spent 7 years studying every single Michael Jackson song, not just memorizing the lyrics and melodies, but understanding the architecture of his voice. The way he breathed, the way he placed consonants, the microscopic variations in his vibrato that made his voice uniquely his. Sophie's parents, David and Lynn Chen, had saved for 2 years to buy tickets to this concert. Sophie had a rare form of progressive hearing loss that doctors said would leave her completely deaf by the time she was 16. She had maybe 4 more years of hearing left. This Michael Jackson concert wasn't just entertainment for Sophie. It was one of her last chances to experience music the way she had always experienced it, as both sound and color, as magic made tangible. I need to remember every second, Sophie had told her mother that morning. I need to memorize how his voice sounds so that when I can't hear anymore, I'll still be able to see the colors in my mind. Sophie had one other extraordinary gift that even her parents didn't fully understand. She had perfect pitch and photographic auditory memory. She could hear a song once and reproduce it with such accuracy that it sounded like a recording. But she never sang in public. She was painfully shy, speaking barely above a whisper even to her closest friends. Michael Jackson was halfway through Thriller, right at the iconic "It's Close to Midnight" verse when disaster struck. His wireless microphone, which had been cutting in and out intermittently throughout the show due to interference issues, suddenly died completely. Michael kept performing, his lips moving with the familiar lyrics, but no sound was coming from the PA system. The 72,000 fans could hear the music, the backing vocals, the sound effects, but Michael Jackson's lead vocal had vanished. Michael's technical crew went into immediate panic mode. The sound engineers frantically tried to switch to the backup microphone system, but something was wrong with the entire wireless frequency range. Stage managers were running, backup singers were trying to cover, but nothing was working. For the first time in his professional career, Michael Jackson was performing without his voice reaching the audience. The crowd began to realize something was wrong. The confusion spread through Wembley Stadium like a wave. People were looking at each other, pointing at the stage, trying to understand what was happening. Michael kept performing, his professionalism absolute, but you could see the frustration and concern in his eyes. This was Thriller. This was the song, and 72,000 people were being robbed of the experience they had paid for. That's when something impossible happened. From Section 201, so far from the stage that most people needed binoculars to see Michael clearly, a voice emerged. Small at first, tentative, but growing stronger with every word. A 12-year-old girl was singing Thriller. But this wasn't just singing along like thousands of fans were trying to do. This was Michael Jackson's voice coming out of a child's body. Every inflection, every breath, every vocal technique that made Michael's voice unmistakable. Sophie Chen, sitting in her seat with her eyes closed, was channeling Michael Jackson's voice with such perfect accuracy that people around her stopped their own singing and just stared at her in shock. The acoustics of Wembley Stadium, combined with the eerie silence where Michael's voice should have been, created something magical. Sophie's voice, small but perfectly pitched, began to carry through the arena. People in nearby sections started to hear it. Then people further away. Her parents watched in absolute shock as their painfully shy daughter, who barely spoke above a whisper in public, sang with the power and precision of a trained professional. Michael Jackson, still on stage, still performing, heard it too. At first, he thought maybe the backup track was playing somehow. But this was live. This was spontaneous. This was someone in the audience perfectly replicating his vocal performance in real time. Michael stopped dancing. He stood completely still in the middle of the stage, his hand going to his ear as if trying to locate the source of this mysterious voice. The backing band, confused but professional, kept playing. The dancers, uncertain what to do, gradually slowed their choreography. Then Michael did something shocking. He gestured for the band to lower their volume. Then lower again. Then almost to silence. 72,000 people fell into a hush as Michael Jackson stood in the spotlight, listening. And in that near silence, everyone could hear it. Clear as crystal, pure as light, a young girl's voice singing Thriller with such perfect accuracy that it sounded supernatural. It's close to midnight. Something evil's lurking in the dark. Michael's face transformed from confusion to wonder to absolute amazement. He began looking out into the crowd, his hand shielding his eyes from the spotlights, trying to find the source of this voice. "Keep singing," Michael said into his dead microphone, forgetting it wasn't working. He grabbed a working microphone from one of his backup singers. "Whoever you are, keep singing. Don't stop." Sophie, in her seat, eyes still closed, didn't even realize what was happening. She was lost in the colors. She was singing not because Michael's microphone had failed, but because the music demanded it. Because in her mind, she could see the golden threads of Michael's voice, and she was simply following them, adding her own voice to complete the pattern that the technical failure had broken. Her parents were trying to get her attention, shaking her gently, but Sophie was somewhere else entirely. She was inside the music. But here's where the story becomes truly extraordinary. The part that nobody could have predicted. Michael's technical crew, while frantically trying to fix the microphone system, made a split-second decision. They routed one of the audience microphones, the ones used to capture crowd noise, through the main PA system. And suddenly, Sophie Chen's voice exploded through Wembley Stadium at full volume. 72,000 people heard this 12-year-old girl singing Thriller with such perfect precision, such absolute mastery, that many people thought it was Michael Jackson somehow singing through the PA system. Michael Jackson stood frozen on stage as he heard his own song, his own vocal techniques, his own artistic choices being perfectly reproduced by someone in his audience. The backup singers had stopped. The dancers had stopped. Even the band was playing softer now, creating space for this mysterious voice. Under the moonlight, you see a sight that almost stops your heart. Sophie sang, her voice carrying every nuance, every emotional beat that Michael had crafted in the original recording. Michael began to tear up, right there on stage in front of 72,000 people. The king of pop had tears streaming down his face as he listened to a voice he had never heard before singing his music as if she had written it herself. Section 201. One of Michael's stage managers said into his earpiece, having tracked the source of the voice through the audio equipment. row 18, approximately seat 30 to 35. Michael pointed to that section, his hand trembling. You, in section 201. I need to meet you. What's your name? The crowd around Sophie erupted, people pointing at her, screaming, trying to get her attention. Sophie finally opened her eyes, emerging from her musical trance, and realized that 72,000 people were looking in her direction. And Michael Jackson was pointing directly at her. She stopped singing immediately, her shyness crashing back over her like a wave. But the damage, or rather, the magic, had already been done. Don't stop, Michael called out. Please don't stop. That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. But Sophie had frozen, unable to continue, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Michael made a decision. Bring her to me, he told his security team. I don't care how long it takes. We're not continuing this show until I meet the person with that voice. What followed was 20 minutes of controlled chaos as Sophie Chen, accompanied by her shocked parents, was escorted from the upper sections of Wembley Stadium down to the stage. The 72,000 fans didn't mind the delay. They were witnessing something unprecedented. They chanted Sophie's name, though most of them didn't know it yet. They chanted, bring her up, as the entire stadium watched this small girl make her way through the concourses and corridors. When Sophie finally reached the stage, she was shaking so badly she could barely walk. Michael met her at the side stairs, taking her small hand in his and leading her gently to center stage. Up close, under the spotlights, Michael could see that this was just a child. A terrified, shy child who looked like she might faint at any moment. What's your name, sweetheart? Michael asked gently, kneeling down to her level, his working microphone capturing every word. Sophie, she whispered, her voice so quiet that even with the microphone, people could barely hear her. Sophie Chen. Sophie Chen, Michael repeated, smiling that famous smile. Do you know what you just did? Do you understand what just happened? Sophie shook her head, unable to speak. Michael stood up and addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, my microphone failed tonight. But Sophie didn't let that stop the music. She sang my song so perfectly, so beautifully, that I thought I was hearing a recording of myself. Sophie, how old are you? 12, Sophie managed to whisper. The crowd erupted. 12 years old. This perfect vocal performance had come from a 12-year-old child sitting in the cheap seats. Michael turned back to Sophie. Sophie, I need to tell you something important. In my entire career, I have never, ever heard anyone sing my songs the way you just did. Not even professional singers. Not even people who have trained their whole lives. What you have is a gift from God. Then Sophie did something that surprised everyone. She looked up at Michael with tears in her eyes and said, her voice breaking, I'm going deaf. The doctors say I have maybe 4 more years before I can't hear anything anymore. I needed to memorize your voice. I needed to learn how to make the colors you make with your music so that when I can't hear you anymore, I can still see the music in my mind. The stadium fell into absolute silence. Michael Jackson's face crumpled. He pulled Sophie into a tight hug right there on stage, and both of them cried together while 72,000 people watched. The colors? Michael asked softly when he could finally speak. Sophie nodded. When you sing, I see colors. Gold and purple and silver. Every note makes shapes. I have synesthesia. I don't just hear music. I see it. Michael was quiet for a long moment, processing what Sophie had just told him. Then he made a decision that would change both of their lives. Sophie, my microphone is still not working. But yours is. Will you help me finish Thriller? Will you be my voice tonight? Sophie looked terrified, but Michael squeezed her hand gently. I'll be right here with you. We'll do it together. You've already proven you know every word, every note. Just close your eyes and show me the colors. What happened next became one of the most legendary moments in concert history. Michael Jackson and 12-year-old Sophie Chen performed Thriller together at Wembley Stadium. Michael sang without a microphone, just mouthing the words and performing the choreography, while Sophie sang his part through the working microphone. And it was perfect. Absolutely, impossibly perfect. Sophie closed her eyes, went back into her world of colors and music, and sang Thriller like she was born to sing it. But Michael did something even more beautiful. During the instrumental break, he began teaching Sophie the choreography. Right there on stage, in front of 72,000 people, Michael Jackson taught a 12-year-old girl the Thriller dance. Sophie, who had never danced in her life, followed his movements with surprising grace. They moonwalked together. They did the zombie moves together. They created something that had never existed before. A duet version of Thriller performed by the original artist and a child who could see his music as colors. When the song ended, Wembley Stadium erupted in an ovation that lasted almost 10 minutes. People were crying, screaming, throwing flowers onto the stage. Sophie stood next to Michael, overwhelmed and disbelieving, while Michael held her hand and bowed with her. After the concert, Michael spent 3 hours with Sophie and her parents backstage. He wanted to understand everything about her synesthesia, about her hearing loss, about how she had learned to replicate his vocal techniques so perfectly. "Sophie," Michael said as the evening was ending, "I want to help you. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because you have a gift that the world needs to hear before." He paused, unable to finish the sentence. "Before I can't hear anymore," Sophie finished for him, smiling sadly. Before that, Michael agreed. "I want to work with you. I want to record with you. I want to help you create a library of music that you can keep in your memory forever, so that even when you can't hear it, you'll always have it inside you." Over the next 4 years, Sophie Chen became Michael Jackson's protege. He flew her and her parents to Los Angeles every few months to work with his vocal coaches, his producers, and eventually to record music together. They created an entire album of duets, Michael's iconic voice blending with Sophie's eerily accurate reproductions of his style. But more importantly, Michael helped Sophie learn music from every genre, every style, building a mental library of colors and sounds that she could access after her hearing was gone. In 1992, at age 16, Sophie lost her hearing completely. But by that time, she had internalized thousands of songs, hundreds of vocal techniques, and entire symphonies of color that existed in her mind. Michael gave her one final gift, a visual notation system that allowed her to read music through color patterns, so she could continue to create even in silence. Sophie went on to become a renowned composer and music educator, specializing in teaching music to deaf children using synesthetic techniques. Her method, called the Chen color system, has helped thousands of deaf children experience music through visual and tactile means. But Sophie never forgot where it all started. That night at Wembley Stadium, when a microphone failure became the doorway to her destiny. Michael Jackson and Sophie Chen remained close friends until Michael's death in 2009. Sophie was one of the featured performers at his memorial service, where she sang Thriller one last time as a tribute to the man who had discovered her voice and changed her life. Today, there's a plaque at Wembley Stadium that reads, "On this stage, July 22nd, 1988, a technical failure became a miracle. In memory of the night when silence made room for an impossible voice." Every major artist who performs at Wembley is told the story of Michael and Sophie, and many have incorporated moments of audience participation into their shows, hoping to discover their own Sophie Chen. The story of Michael Jackson and Sophie Chen reminds us that sometimes the most beautiful moments come from accidents, from failures, from the unexpected breaking of our carefully planned performances. Michael's microphone failed that night, but in that failure, he discovered something more precious than any perfect show, a connection with a child who saw his music as colors, who loved his art so deeply that she had memorized not just his songs, but the very essence of how he created them. Sophie Chen once said in an interview, "People ask me if I'm sad that I'm deaf. I tell them no, because Michael Jackson taught me that music isn't just sound. Music is color, emotion, memory, connection. I lost my hearing, but I never lost the music. It's still in here," she would say, pointing to her head. "All the colors Michael showed me. They never fade. They never die. That's what real music is. It lives forever, even in silence." The night Michael Jackson's microphone died at Wembley Stadium, 72,000 people learned that sometimes the most important voices are the ones we almost don't hear. Sometimes genius hides in the cheap seats. Sometimes the future of music sits quietly in row 18, seeing colors nobody else can see, waiting for one technical failure to reveal what has been there all along. Subscribe to hear more untold stories about the moments when technology failed but humanity triumphed. Share this video with someone who has a hidden gift waiting to be discovered. Leave a comment about a time when something went wrong but led to something beautiful. Because sometimes, just like that night at Wembley, the microphone has to die for the real voice to finally be heard.